Well, as Colette said, I'm Paul Dietmann. I'm with Compeer Financial. And Compeer is part of the Farm Credit System. So we're the Farm Credit System Association that serves Wisconsin, the northern half of Illinois, and about half of Minnesota. I've been with Compeer, actually was Badgerland prior to that, for a little over 6 years. I was a loan officer at first, then I became an emerging market specialist, specializing specifically in small-scale agriculture. People who were working outside of conventional corn, soybeans, and dairy. So I primarily work with pretty small-scale farm operations. Prior to that, I was at the Wisconsin Farm Center at the Wisconsin Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection, which is the Farmers Assistance Program there. Did a lot of business planning with beginning farmers. We did a lot of farm transfer work. Before that, I was county extension agent for 11 years in Sauk County, Wisconsin, which is Baraboo, if anybody is familiar with Wisconsin. So my office was in Baraboo, and I did a lot of farm management work there. So I've been working in farm financial management for a really long time. I had an opportunity to, back in about 2010, I was serving on the board of Midwest Organic and Sustainable Education Service. And after the Moses Organic Farming Conference, we were having a discussion about the resources in the bookstore at the Moses Conference. Has anybody been to the Moses Conference in La Crosse? It's awesome, isn't it? I went to my first one in 1994. I've never missed it since, never. And they sell $50,000 worth of books at that conference. And we realized that in the bookstore, even selling $50,000 worth of books, there were no books on farm financial management, nothing on farm financial management. There were a few books that maybe got into enterprise budgeting, but nothing that was kind of a one-stop resource for anything that you needed to know about farm financial management, from how to put together a balance sheet, to develop an income statement, to cash flows, to doing ratio analysis, investment analysis, all that sort of thing. And so a group of us got together and wrote this book, Fearless Farm Finances. We just came out with the second edition last year. And so, and I should say, even though I'm a co-author of the book, I get nothing from the book. I don't get royalties from it. It's owned by Moses. Moses sells it, so if you buy it, you're supporting Moses, but I really encourage you to get a copy of it. So I want to talk about just a few things that working with farmers, and especially smaller scale farmers, people who are doing value-added agriculture, direct marketing, meat, organic farmers, some of the things that I see them maybe making some mistakes, or things that they do really well. And I work with both. And so we're trying to get people on the right track right from the start. We don't want people to get too far down the wrong track. So the first thing that I always recommend to my farmers is to develop a simple business plan. And it can be a really simple business plan. We started a microloan program last year at Compeer, and up to $50,000 we can make a loan without a minimum credit score. We can offer better collateral value. So we can match FSA's microloan lending rates. So we're loaning money right now at 3.5% interest. But one thing that we require is a simple business plan. And when I say simple, I mean really simple. It can be a page, it can be 2 pages. It doesn't have to be War and Peace. I mean, we don't need a 100-page business plan. I just want to see like 1 or 2 pages just to give us a rough sense of what you want to do in the business. So what's the purpose of a business plan? Well, number one, it's a place to consolidate and kind of give structure to your ideas. So it sort of forces you to take an idea from just a good idea in your head to put it on paper and really kind of sketch out, what's this business going to look like? How am I going to get it started? How am I going to develop it from here to there? A timeline for making investments in the business, that sort of thing. So it's a guide to follow from a great idea through a feasibility analysis to figure out whether you can make money at the business, through the startup phase, and then maybe through an expansion phase. It can be a vehicle to attract investment of debt or equity. And that's something a lot of farmers don't understand. There's debt financing, there's equity financing. Equity financing is you putting your own money into your business, or it's getting other people to put their money into your business as an equity investment that doesn't require a principal and interest payment on a monthly basis like we do in our business. So that can be a purpose of the business plan. So at its most basic, this is the structure of a business plan. And I'll talk about each one of these sections individually. But there's basically 6 major sections of a business plan. So if we can boil it down to just those 6 things, executive summary, business description, operations, marketing plan, management and organization, and then a financial plan. The executive summary, it appears first, but it's the last thing that you write when you're working on your business plan. And you can kind of think of it as a cover letter for the business plan. So you write the other 5 sections, and then you just pick out the highlights from each of those 5 sections and move them up into the executive summary. And that can be a pretty brief thing. It could just be one sentence out of each of the other 5 sections of the business plan. No more than 1 page, though. You know, I've seen some business plans, I've had business plans that come across my desk that are 5 pages in the executive summary. I've had business plans that come in that are 200 pages. I will never read a 200-page business plan. I just can't. I just don't have the time to do it. So if you keep it really short, keep it succinct, simple, we're going to read the executive summary first, we're going to flip to the financial section, and then we'll start reading the rest of it if that makes sense. You want to be sure to include a summary of your financing request. And that's something I find a mistake that people make very often. I'll get a business plan and they don't say how much money they need. You know, and I'm saying, I'm with a lending institution. If you're presenting a business plan to me, that means that you probably want some money. Well, tell me how much money you want. You know, that's a pretty basic question, but people leave that out for some reason. The business description is really the first place that you start writing in a business plan. And this is usually a pretty easy one for most farmers to write because you're talking about your business. You're talking about where it's located, what your facilities are like, maybe a little bit of the history of your farm business. You know, so usually this is a pretty simple piece of the plan for a farm owner to write. You don't want to get too deep or too far into the weeds in this section, but you want to kind of give a good description. So I've never been to your farm. I want to be able to get a sense of it in my mind. I want to be able to get a picture of it in my mind, and that's where I get it, is from the business description that you write. The next section is operations. Here's where you start digging into a little more of the meat. You know, what are the products or services that you're offering? What's your production system? Do you have a production system that's somewhat unique? Are there things that you're using that a lot of farmers aren't? How do you maintain standards of quality and customer service? And how do you manage your inventory? In inventory, especially in a value-added business, inventory can be a real challenge where you're building up product. I work with a lot of people who are direct marketing meat, for example, and they'll have a lot of product in inventory in the freezer. What value do you put on that inventory? How are you rolling that inventory? How fast is it going to move through the system? Licenses, permits, or patents that you hold, the risks in your business and how you manage them. And that's one that gets lost a lot of times. People tend to discount the risks. Everybody is very optimistic about their business getting going and being successful. And they tend to minimize the risk and ignore some of the risks that might be inherent in your business. What gives your business a moat to thwart competition? What gives you some space around your business that gives you a competitive advantage over other people doing the same thing that you're doing? And then plans for business growth and expansion and a timeline for those plans. And a realistic timeline. A lot of times people are very ambitious and they want things to move really fast. And my experience is it always takes at least a year or two longer than you think it's going to take to reach different milestones in the business. Fourth is a marketing plan. So what are the market trends in the business? What are your target markets and who are your customers? Who's your ideal customer for your product or your service that you're offering? How are you pricing your products? How are you promoting and distributing your products? We like to see some historic and projected sales data. So if you're projecting that your sales are going to hit $100,000, where have you been the last couple of years that makes it likely you're going to hit that target? And then if you have strategic partners or contracts that give you some sort of an edge over your competition. Like I was just doing some business planning last week with a young farmer. His brother is a chef. And so his brother not only is buying his products and putting them in his restaurant, he's connected him with a lot of other chefs, which is a huge advantage in the business that he's in. Management and organization. Who are the members of your management team? And this can be a formal management team or it can be an informal management team. Are there people that you rely on to get good information and advice? People that you really trust that are helping your business be more successful? So it can be a board of directors, it can be an advisory team. You kind of want to describe how those people are adding value to your business. What are the sorts of questions that you go to for this person versus that person? How's the business structured? Are you an LLC? Are you subchapter S or subchapter C corporation? Are you just a sole proprietor? And then who's providing professional services such as tax, accounting, and legal work? And then finally, the financial plan. And this is one that if there's one single thing that's missing from most of the business plans that I get, it's the financial plan. I can't tell you how many business plans I look at where I get to the financial section and it'll say, see me for the financials, or provided on request, or something like that. It's like, I'm a lender, I want to see financials. I'm a numbers guy, I got to see the numbers. So we want to see balance sheets. We want to see a balance sheet that's current as of today. But we like to see historic balance sheets. That's a little bit harder to get. Not a lot of people are doing a balance sheet on a regular basis, but that's something, as we get into a few more financial tips, it's one thing I'm gonna hammer on you a little bit about, and that's putting together a balance sheet as of the first of the year every single year, and get in that habit and just keep updating it year after year after year. Because if you have that balance sheet, you can put it together with your tax returns and you can do a full analysis of your operation. And it shows historic trends too, and so as you come in for a loan, I can look back and see how you've built equity in your business over a period of time. It's really important. And then projecting the balance sheet out. Sometimes it's just projecting it for a year. I usually try to, when I'm working with farmers, try to project it for a couple of years out, because we want to see, during times when cash flow is tight, we want to see if you're still building equity in your business. And are you going to have the resilience to keep going over a long period of time? Cash flow projections. We want to see a month-by-month cash flow projection for at least a year. And I'm going to talk a little more about cash flow here in a second. And then I want to do annual projections for at least 2 years further out. It's pretty hard to do a month-by-month projection for more than a year. But we want to at least project on an annual basis what the cash flow is going to look like. Sources and uses of cash. Some of those sources are going to be your money, some are going to be our money, but how are you going to use the cash that you have available to you? Projected income statements are helpful. They're not absolutely necessary. They're a little bit more difficult for most people to put together, but they can be very helpful. Detailed assumptions to back up the projections too. So as you're building your cash flow, and when I'm working with a farmer and building a cash flow, I keep Microsoft Word running at the same time, and I'm taking notes as we're building the cash flow so that we can go back and say, okay, well, here's why we projected that sales would be higher in June, July, August than they would be the rest of the year. And if you've got a financing request, if you're coming in for financing, that's what your purpose of your business plan is, think like a lender. So a lender is going to need cash flow to support loan payments. So however we structure the debt, and it doesn't have to be a month by month, it doesn't have to be monthly payments, it could be an annual payment. I do a lot of operating loans. Those can be on a 12-month, with a single payment at the end of 12 months. It could be 18 months if it's a grass-fed beef operation where it takes a little longer for those animals to come to market. So we just have to figure out, make sure that the cash flow is lining up with the debt payments. And then we need collateral to back the loan. So they have to have some security to back up that loan. So any questions on business planning before I move on? Yes?
So I work with a nonprofit where we teach farm business planning, and we struggle with the disconnect between business people and farmers and that language barrier of just how different farm business is from any other business. So I'm wondering if you have any kernels of advice for somebody who's trying to communicate the difference between a regular business and a farm business, and how that shows up in the business plans as you review that. Like if you were just a standard business reviewer versus somebody who's actually reviewing farm business plans.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question was about the difference between most businesses and agricultural businesses, and how you bridge that gap in a business plan, and how you evaluate a business plan when you're looking at it from a farm perspective. Yeah, there's some fundamental differences between a farm business and other types of businesses. Number one is we typically use a market basis balance sheet as opposed to a cost basis balance sheet. So if you're using QuickBooks, QuickBooks is going to force you to do a cost basis balance sheet. So in a cost basis balance sheet, you buy a tractor and you pay $10,000 and you start depreciating it. Next year it's going to be worth $10,000 less the accrued depreciation. That's what it's going to show up on the balance sheet at. Whereas with a market basis balance sheet, if you paid $10,000 for a tractor and it's still worth $10,000 a year from now, it's going to show up on the balance sheet at $10,000. It throws us off a bit when we're looking at profitability, rate of return on assets, rate of return on equity, because you're going to come up with much different numbers depending on the type of balance sheet that you're using. The other difference, primary difference, is that we use cash accounting in agriculture or in farming as opposed to accrual accounting. So cash, the income shows up when it shows up in cash in the checking account, and a bill is paid when it's paid out in cash, paid out of the checking account. With other businesses, when a product ships, that's when it's considered sold. If you don't get the check for a year, that product was already sold. It showed up as income already. We can do some accrual adjustments, and that's something, I don't know, Kevin, if you're going to talk about that at all, but No. So another reason why we need two balance sheets. We need a balance sheet on January 1st every year so that we can look at how certain categories like accounts payable, receivables, raised breeding livestock, and a few other categories have changed from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. We make an accrual adjustment, and then we can do our income statements and calculate profitability. So there's a few basic differences like that. That's something, we get into a lot of that in Fearless Farm Finances, and we have a glossary of terms and all that sort of thing that, we try to make it really helpful for people who maybe aren't as familiar with agricultural businesses. So, okay, let me jump into cash flow planning. So this is another common mistake I see a lot of people do. This is an enterprise budget. So in an enterprise budget, we look at gross income on the top line, and it could be per acre, it could be per head, it could be per marketing outlet. When I'm working with CSA growers, they may have an enterprise budget for their CSAs, their subscription farm sales. They may have another enterprise budget for their wholesale, and then they may have another enterprise budget for anything that they're selling at farmers markets. So enterprise budget, we just do the gross income on the top line. Then we have variable costs. So those are costs you wouldn't have if you weren't growing anything. Seed, plants, fertilizer, soil amendments, hired labor, all the things. If you weren't growing anything, you wouldn't have these costs at all. And then we have overhead costs. So a land charge, repairs and insurance, other overhead costs, costs that you're going to have whether you're growing anything or not. Property taxes. If you own land, you're going to have to pay property taxes whether you're producing anything on your land or not. So that's an overhead expense. So we take our gross revenue, subtract our variable costs, subtract our overhead costs, and it gives us a projected net return per acre. So in this case, for a CSA operation, we're projecting a net return of $17,847 an acre, which sounds great. But people will do this. It's kind of a back-of-the-envelope calculation. I think of it more as a feasibility analysis. They do this back-of-the-envelope calculation and say, well, I can make $17,847. If I'm growing 3 acres, I can make $53,000. I'm going to quit my off-farm job because $53,000 is great. I can live on $53,000 a year. Don't stop here. Because as we know, we typically don't get the income first and then pay the expenses. It works just the opposite, right? There are some other things missing in here. We don't have family living costs in here. We don't have principal payments on loans in here. We have our land in at an opportunity cost. So if land is renting for $200 an acre in your area, we're going to charge ourselves in our enterprise budget $200 an acre for the land, for using the land, because we could rent that land out for $200 or we could use it ourselves. So even though this is a good way of getting an estimate of what you can make off your farm, it's not the place to stop. And I see too many people do that. They stop and then 2 years from now they're looking back and saying, well, I thought I was going to make $53,000. My checkbook is empty. I don't have health insurance, and haven't saved anything for my kids' college education or anything. What went wrong? So we got to take it to the next level, and that's this. So this is a month-by-month cash flow projection. The way you read this, we're starting in January. So in January 1st, they had $10,000 in the farm checking account, right? This is a CSA operation. They had no income coming in January and February. So they start with $10,000, no cash came in. They did have some cash going out though. They had farm operating expenses. They had car and truck expenses of $100. They had an insurance bill that came due, that was $250. They're doing some repairs in the middle of winter, that was $300. First half of the property tax bill came due, that was $1,500. So they're sitting down, they're writing out checks during the month. They wrote out $2,430 worth of checks out of the farm checking account. Then they had a farm mortgage. The principal and interest payment on the mortgage is $1,743 a month. So they had to pay that bill. And then they had to live on something, that was $2,500. So they had all that money that went out during the month. It ended up being $6,673 that went out during the month of January. So you started with $10,000 and nothing that came in, $6,600 went out. They ended the month with $3,327 in the checking account. So then that starts February. And again, they had no income that came in, but they had bills that came due, they had to pay their mortgage, they had to live on something. They ended the month negative. They were negative by $5,166. So they started March in the hole, but then they start selling CSA subscriptions, 45,000 of CSA subscriptions, paid their bills, and you look out the rest of the year, the cash flow is okay. They never run negative any other month. Well, what happens? So typically a farm family is going to cut their family living to next to nothing. Well, $2,500, even if they lived on zero during the month, that's not going to make up a $5,000 shortfall. So then they start putting things on credit cards. Or they start doing other things that start some bad stuff going on, leaving some bills unpaid, those sorts of things. So if you don't go through this projection, you don't realize that you're going to be short, that's what you're going to end up doing. If we know we're going to be short, we've done this projection, well, maybe we can offer our subscribers a discount to pay their subscriptions in February, and we'll get through that month. If this is a startup farm, maybe we wait and we start with $15,000 instead of $10,000. We just wait another couple of months to start the farm. Or maybe we add a different enterprise, or maybe we take an operating loan, or, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different things. If we've gone through this projection, we know we're going to be short, now all of a sudden it opens up all sorts of opportunities to come up with a better plan. They end the year with $16,234 in the checking account. Otherwise, this pretty much follows that enterprise budget I showed you before. So they didn't end up with $53,000. They ended up with an extra $6,000, but they paid all their bills. They lived on $30,000. They paid all of their principal and interest payments on their mortgage. So really critical to do this. And I'm happy to share this little spreadsheet with you, by the way. It's on our website. If you go to compeer.com, search for cash flow projection, you'll find this spreadsheet. It's just an Excel spreadsheet. So I want to run through just a couple of rules of thumb real quickly before I run completely out of time here. Rule number one, I already mentioned this, get in the habit of updating the balance sheet on January 1st every year. It documents the value of the business at a particular point in time. We're going to build a history over a long period of time. You can see how your equity built over time. It's going to show you progress that you're making in business even when your cash flow is tight. And that's something working with beginning farmers the first 2-3 years. Cash flow is going to be tight. And there's going to be months when it's going to be negative. And there may be years that it's going to be negative. And it can be really discouraging. And people get ready to throw in the towel. Well, if you've been doing your balance sheet, we can look at the balance sheet and say, yeah, okay, cash flow is tight. Checking account's almost empty. But you've added $10,000 of equity over the last year. So you're doing something. You're building a business here. It isn't going to be built overnight, but you're making progress. You're going the right direction. It also is going to align with your federal tax return, which then makes the financial analysis easy. We can calculate 21 financial ratios if we've got balance sheets, 2 balance sheets, beginning and ending of the year, and your tax return in between. And that's just an example of a simple balance sheet. And you can get balance sheets anywhere. You know, Kevin's center has balance sheets. We have them on our website, whatever. So that's the balance sheet. Rule number 2, build and maintain a strong credit bureau score if you're planning to seek loans. And even if you're not, it's just going to make life a lot easier for you if you have a decent credit score. This is kind of the way credit scores shake out. Most people end up in the 750 and above range. Our minimum credit score is 650. So if it's below 650, generally speaking, we're not going to be able to make a loan. An exception is in our microloan program. So the microloan program that we started, we don't have a minimum credit score, so I've made loans to people with credit scores in the 400s. But we do a lot of hand-holding. I'm doing a lot of cash flow analysis with them. I'm meeting with them on a quarterly basis to go over their financials and trying to help them kind of get back on track.
Is that advice cost prohibitive?
Pardon me?
Is that advice you give to them cost prohibitive?
Oh, no. The question is, so the advice that I give, is it cost prohibitive? If they have a microloan with us, that's part of the service that we provide. So even at a very low interest rate, we're still, our point is we want to try to get people in business and get them successful, and hopefully they're growing over time. And yes?
If you're starting a young farm, is that based on your personal credit?
Yeah, it is.
Multiple farmers, it's personal credit, and then should you start building a farm credit score?
There is no such thing as a farm credit score. It's always going to be your personal credit score. Yeah, if you're an LLC, there's no credit score for an LLC. It's going to be your personal credit score. So that's why it's really critical to build it and try to maintain it. So how do you build your credit score? Well, payment history carries the most weight. That's the number one thing. If you want to destroy your credit score, run up some credit card debt and then don't make any payments for 4 or 5 months. It will take your credit score down by 200 points. It really is that fast. 4 or 5 months of no payments and your credit score will drop that much. Use no more than 30% of available credit. So if you've got a credit card that's got a $10,000 limit, never carry a balance of more than $3,000, or never run a balance of more than $3,000, even if you pay it off every month. Don't ever use more than $3,000 of your $10,000 credit card. You want to build long-term credit relationships. I'll have people say, well, I get a 0% card and then I just roll that balance to another 0% card and then I roll it to another. Don't do that. No, have one card and handle it successfully. Keep that relationship for a long period of time. Use various types of credit. Be careful about applying for new credit, especially when you need a major loan. So I'll have somebody that'll come for a farm loan and they went and bought a new truck a month before. And that makes it really difficult to, when you're looking at a farm loan if you've already just taken a big credit. Don't use credit cards as your sole source of operating capital. And this is a mistake I see a lot of beginning farmers make. And it's easy to do. You start putting stuff on credit cards and you think, well, I'll just pay the balance at the end of the month. And then, no, this month I wasn't able to pay the balance. Well, then you buy some equipment and it's on the credit card. And you think, well, nobody's going to give me a loan for a $2,000 piece of equipment. Don't do that. Go to a lender, get a small line of credit. Don't put it on credit cards. 58% of new firms, financed operations with credit cards in their first year. Every $1,000 increase in credit card debt increased the probability of failure by 2.2%. You know, that's debt that's accruing at 18%. And if you don't make the payments, then it goes to a penalty interest rate that can be above 20%. I've worked with people who've had household finance loans at 36%. I had a guy last year that had a 10-month loan at a 99% annualized rate of interest. Don't do that. That's terrible. Don't do that. Rule number 4, keep capital investment as low as possible. Capital investment, the more capital investment you make, reduces the flexibility in your farming system. You're adding overhead costs. It's a big burden on a new business. So try to rent if you can, rather than owning machinery, land, facilities. Rule number 5, investments you make on your own farm may not add value to your balance sheet. I run into this like with permaculture, where people will do a permaculture installation. It's very expensive, but it doesn't add any value on the balance sheet. There's no market value there if the farm ends up having to be sold. It can still be a great investment, but you have to get that return on the investment out of your cash flow. You're not going to get it out of the market value that you're adding because there may not be any market value. And then one of the D events can derail your plans along the way: divorce, death, disability. And then finally, rule number 6, it can make good sense to make capital investments on a rented farm. This is another tough one for beginning farmers to think about. Why would I put fencing on a farm that I don't own? Why would I build a pack shed on a farm that I don't own? Well, if you have that farm under your control, you have a long-term rental agreement, you can actually get a really decent rate of return on the investment, better than you could get if you owned the farm. So I want to just give you a really quick example and then I'm done. Let's say that we're thinking about pasturing. We have to invest $10,000 up front in fencing, watering system, et cetera, to make a pasture usable. It's 40 acres. We're not going to get anything back at the end of year 5 if the lease isn't renewed. So we're going to put $10,000 in right now to build fence on 40 acres. We're going to have a 5-year lease. We're expecting we're going to net $100 per acre in cash flow, or $4,000 for that whole 40-acre pasture. Here's what that investment looks like. So we put $10,000 in up front. We got $4,000 a year of annual net cash flow. The internal rate of return on that investment is 28.65%. That's an annualized rate of return on that rented pasture, even though you put $10,000 in and you're walking away with nothing at the end of 5 years. I do this a lot with beginning farmers. Pack shed, walk-in cooler. I mean, there's a lot of different capital investments you can make on a rented farm that gives you a really good rate of return. Whereas if you bought this farm, if you use that $10,000 and use it as a down payment, your rate of return would be 2%. So this is another really critical thing, and it's a different way, it's a different mindset. We have an ownership mindset in agriculture. It's a different way of thinking about things. So that's what I've got. So, sorry.